Hey, when we're trying to understand movement dysfunction, pain, something's not working, usually we can categorize it in a couple simple ways. Now look, these are simple ways to think about pain, dysfunction, and movement. One, fever, night sweats, dizziness, vomiting, nausea, pathology, right? Something's going on. Two, you have a clear mechanism of injury. So we call that catastrophe, right? Those two things are kind of obvious. So that's why you're hurting. Three, the other two categories, and again, these are generalizations. One is what we call an open circuit, which means the body is not working in its sort of most congruent positions. And sometimes we have to work in those shapes. We have to be in strange shapes. They just don't handle force or repetitive load as effectively as more stable positions, more joint congruent positions, more closed pack positions, more packed positions. But if we take that apart, sometimes we watch people move and they move beautifully. And what you think to yourself is, well, that looks great, so what's going on there? That leads us to our last one, which is overtension. So oftentimes we can just have tissues that are under a lot of tension and resistance. Like I lived in this old house in San Francisco, and one of the doors, the hinges was super tight, over 100 years old. There was a pile of hinge dust below. Now look, before you get all weird in the comments and talk about, oh, your body's not a hinge, I get it. But the idea is, hey, a system that is under too much tension doesn't behave as correctly, and as you fatigue, you're going to more likely to end up in one of those open circuit positions instead of a closed stable position. But simple overtension, your body can read that as, hey, that's threat. So easy way to look at this, for example, is to obviously begin by saying, hey, let's play press and guess. Push on your quads are stiff, we don't have range of motion. But an easier, sort of more nuanced way, not more easy, but is to look at someone's programming. And for example, we have a good friend who's very strong, and they have some knee pain and squatting, and it's kind of kept them from being, really enjoying themselves. And they're a very capable athlete. Well, it turns out, watch them squat, and they squat beautifully. That's not the problem. They're an excellent squatter. But if you look at their programming, what you'll see is that there are no positions of hip extension in that language. What you'll see is that people will go from a flex position to a standing up, more leg straight position. That's where I'm extending the hip. But I'm talking about bringing the hip actually into extension. And we can actually extrapolate this idea of looking at someone's programming and see missing positions. Now it's complicated because the human being is complex. And we love to tell like just so stories, well, you don't do this and that's why this is tight. It's more complex than that. But what we know is that your fascia and your musculature and your joints do more than one thing. And in order to have normative function, to have full function, you actually have to have range on both sides. So even though you may only be a rower, right, you need to be able to extend the hip powerfully, not just extend the hip, but actually have hip extension with some functionality if you're going to actually load some of those tissues so that they work on the other side. And so, for example, if you're only going from a squat position, hinge, squat, back up, chances are you're going to be missing some big chunks. And what we see then is an easy way to remedy that is to begin by saying, hey, either during warm-up or during cool-down, let's throw in some isometrics in there. Let's load it up. But let's not do more busy work. Let's give your brain a chance to load those fascial patterns, load those lines, put those tissues under tension. Let's have some exposure, and that's where we start. So I'm going to show you my two favorite ways to get my hip primed for better hip extension. One is a warm-up drill, and the other one's a finish drill. So the warm-up drill we've talked about before, and we've taken from Frans Bosch, adapted from Frans Bosch. And basically, we're going to put the leading leg or front leg up on a box, and it's an easy way to press, get overhead. So this is one of the ways that I prep. I'll have Coach Diane grab a couple light dumbbells, and what she's going to do is just step up and put her foot right up on a bench or a box. So this is an easy way to get some extension loading in. Now what's great here is that I have my athlete warming up for going overhead today, doing seesaw press, doing whatever she needs to get prepped, right? Just getting the hips warm, the shoulders warm, whatever. But what I'm interested in is that she can get the heel off the ground. She can have a slight bend in her knee if she needs. Is the glute on? And basically by taking that system and moving it upright, by just lifting that front leg up, the load through that rear anterior line, or the anterior line on the rear leg, goes through the roof, and you can feel that there. Yep. Every time she presses, her body's trying to get pushed down, she has to resist that. So it's an excellent way to get some additional loading in here. And she can do some on the left, some on the right, some in the middle, and suddenly I can be working up a little bit more intuitively with some other, that's like 1,000 reps, good job. Okay, so now check that out. So that's one of my favorite primers. So before, again, we haven't lunged, we haven't loaded this dynamic, let's just start putting some loads in to this position which was deficit and missing from your programming language. So you can almost think of it as like assistance work, accessory work for shapes. Now check it out. My second favorite one comes from our friend's Secret of Athleticism. And I've talked about this before. We see some of our favorite MMA fighters do this. So it's an end range isometric here, or available range isometric. Glutes are on. The magic is that she comes up on the toe in the front. And the reason this is important is not just balance, not of course because she's loading the calf and the fascia, but as soon as she comes up on her toes, this quad goes on. And because this quad turns on and activates differently, when the heel is down, put your heel down, that's different. Come up on the toe, this whole line has to work hard, that's not what we're interested. But because she gets a better isometric here, Frans Bosch style, we get better glute function. That hip here stabilizes the pelvis so that the glute can do its job. She's holding a couple 44s. We do sets of 30 seconds. And the key here is that she'll know for a second when she's done. Got all the toes contacted in the back, up on the heel, glute engaged, holding. This is my finisher. So we have a great start position, great finish position. All my cyclists, all my runners, I'm like, oh, come in, finish. Switch sides when you feel done. You hit 30 seconds, you hit the other side. We're gonna need to get heavier dumbbells, heavier kettlebells. And the idea here is that we can do some positional awareness loading these lines, putting these isometrics in here, teaching the brain, these are the shapes I own. This is my home, this is where I live. So again, we got here because, hey, you're moving beautifully. Wonder what it is. Well, it turns out, for example, with the shoulder, you need to have a shoulder that can do everything it needs to do in order to have a shoulder that's at full power. The same thing is true in the hip. Even if you're just a hip flexion athlete, like a cyclist or a rower, you need to be able to extend your hip. And the problem is some of our language of training, especially in powerlifting and even in Olympic lifting, we don't see enough hip extension. Easy way to work some pre-drills in, post-drills, so you can have better hips for all the things that, hips do. See you next time.